Thank you, Julie. And while I get all things up here in order, I would like to welcome the people on Zoom. I welcomed you earlier. You just forgot to be here. I'm sorry you had trouble getting connected. I choose to talk about aging today because for so many of us, it's right in our face. It's the water we swim in. If we look around the room, it's easy to see that most of us, not all of us, but many of us, have reached a point in life where we are, how do I phrase it? We've become persons of a certain age. For those of you who are younger, the messages I relate today should be relevant to you as well. Not only do you know and possibly care for persons further into their years than you, but believe me, you're going to catch up, inevitably. And anything I say about aging really applies to all of us anyway. And the best time to form our attitudes about our coming years is now, no matter what our current age might be. I try not to say old, not just because it sounds negative, but also because I don't really know what old is and who it applies to. I know it can't be defined solely by the number of years one has lived. My wife's father, for example, he's a driven man who believes deeply that you should do things the right way. And if you do, you will likely benefit. He's lived his life in an active, virtuous, and judgmental way. And he drives me nuts. Well into his 90s, he exercised daily and saw a personal trainer regularly. He dealt with some diminishment of capacity, but he worked tirelessly to overcome them. A few years ago, in autumn of 2018, I was in Boston to appear before the UUA Ministerial Fellowship Committee in the rite of passage that led to my being allowed to become a UU minister. I would thought I was bold, starting a new career at the age of 68. But at that very same time, just a few miles away, my father-in-law was at Mass General Hospital having a heart valve replaced. Now, this wasn't essential. It was an elective procedure for him. He wanted it so he could qualify for the hip replacement that might allow him to continue training. He was going for it, trying to maintain physical vitality that was so key to his own image of self. Maybe some of his parts were beginning to fail, and maybe he was experiencing some denial, but he had not surrendered. I have trouble thinking of this 95-year-old man as being old. I challenge each of you to think back to some time in your youth, young adulthood, whenever, and recall at what age you felt that people became old. Now, this is sort of a trick question. Most people my age really were older back then, if they were still breathing. You know, whatever it is the new whatever's younger than that. Medicine, lifestyle shifts, and other changes in the quality of life have driven back the vagaries of time and age a bit. Someone age 70 probably was old back then. Our Social Security system thought so. It was actuarialized on the assumption that most of us won't survive for long after retirement. Joke's on them. Aging does bring challenges, many types. At best, we slow down a bit, tire more easily, experience new comforts and pains. Your body and everything in it has an expiration date. You just never know what it is. Muscles don't get so taut anymore, and when they do, they ache for far longer. Stiffness moves into our joints. seemingly forgetting that the whole purpose of joints is supposed to be to allow mobility. Funny things grow on our outsides, and some of our insides go on the fritz. That's a medical term. And while it seems unfair, the biologists assure us that this is just the necessary product of our complex evolutionary adaptation. If you want to live forever, come back as an amoeba. There are many issues related to aging, and I will examine many of them. I will examine many of them next month with those of you that decide to participate in the discussions we will start later in April. Details to come. For this morning, I will touch briefly on death and what comes after, on our bodies, but mostly I will focus on our emotional and spiritual well-being through this time of life. Death is the end game of aging, and each of us will reach this finality. It's often claimed that humans turn to religion as the result of facing death, and that modern religions started spreading around the world when we began to bury it. A huge share of energy and dogma are directed towards understanding our relation to eternity, the afterlife, salvation, or damnation. These ideas are a powerful motivator. People will do anything to win that golden ticket of eternal bliss if they believe it exists. The enticement of everlasting happiness and a reunion with loved ones that have gone before, this is quite compelling. Few of us here today hold literal ideas of an afterlife or of the eternal existence of our conscious selves and sins. Those of us who feel that we continue usually have a more abstract or a vaguer notion of what our reincarnation might mean, maybe as an energy, a spiritual essence, a force going forward. Others of us, myself included, believe that death is just final and all aspects of me shall cease. But even if we don't see death as a gateway, we do not hold it lightly. I don't really know which is scarier, facing judgment and eternity, or just turning off the switch. But facing death becomes more real and more salient as we live into our later years. And however we see reconciliation, we care, and we need to attend to it for our own well-being. Our bodies, like all systems, wear out and fall apart. Most of us could tell many stories about physical failings and probably do so too often. Such talk is common, and I will advise that it's far more pleasant when presented as humor. Medicine pushed back the envelope, but aging is always with us. One of the miracles of modern medicine is how many of us get to fully experience our own process of falling apart. Not long ago, more lives were interrupted early by disease, infection, and untreatable conditions. But medicine has gotten so good that we expect our doctors to fix almost anything. And eventually they might. But one way or another, we will always be mortal. But let me avoid complacency here. Any malady, any pain, any basic failure of the body is a matter of intense importance to the person experiencing the difficulty and to those they love. Pain and fear are no less real in any experience. One of the advances that is most welcome is the advent of palliative and hospice caregiving at the end of life. When we cannot save someone from dying, it is wonderful that we can protect them from the worst of the pain and the dislocation it brings. And our medical accomplishments have also produced whole new sets of issues, such as the critical questions surrounding end of life decisions. As an aside, let me give some very strong pastoral advice. Please have your affairs in order, whatever your age. Things like a power of attorney for healthcare, a living will, or just a will. It really makes your passing so much easier for everyone else. The last category I mentioned, though, is feelings, the social and psychological changes that attend to adjusting to the imminence of death, to the imminence of failure. So much changes. Most of the roles that defined us to ourselves throughout life change or disappear. Children moved on. Careers changed or ended. We might downsize our homes. As our energy and skills diminish, our circles of engagement become smaller and more local. We lose people. Acquaintances and loved ones die, and others move on in their own lives. We have to cope with the losses that aging brings. If not, we can become isolated, lonely, depressed. These are common as the world retreats from us. Many elderly persons become unhappy and despondent, especially if they face poverty, pain, and ill health. The recent pandemic only reinforced the bad forces at work here. But before I try to drive you to despair, I will signal, and maybe the reading was a clue, that I do not view aging as a necessary tragedy, and I do not assume that we have to become unhappy in our later years. My eventual conclusion, if I ever get there, will look something like, so much depends on attitude, which in turn depends on self-honesty and awareness. No one can age happily if they are in denial of the reality and inevitability of change. We change, the world changes dramatically. But there is no reason to stop growing or caring during this portion of our journey. A recent congregant invited me to read a book titled Winter's Graces, written by psychologist Susan Avery Stewart. Dr. Stewart's theme is that we hold negative images of aging because we focus on loss. A number of factors, including exaggerated fear of death, overvaluing of autonomy, appearance, and achievement, have led to an inaccurate view of aging as a humiliating descent into misery. Those of us who buy these images tend to have difficulty because we allow them to guide our responses to change. But in contrast to the failure picture, Dr. Stewart describes life qualities that can reach their fullest expression in the later years. None of these are exclusive to the elderly, and yet they are strongest if they have developed throughout our life experience. She calls these qualities winter's graces. And they are, and I'll just read the list: agelessness, audacious authenticity, compassion, contentment, courage, creativity, necessary fierceness, remembrance, self-transcending generosity, simplicity, and wisdom. Those are good things. I will not try to explain or expound on each. She does this in her book and illustrates them lovingly with folk tales that highlight and honor these traits in older women. But notice that each is related to increased access to personal honesty and self-knowledge. Many of the barriers we experience in the course of life that have interfered with our ability to become our best and wisest selves disappear in our older age as we separate from the demands of our early life patterns. In later years, we have extensive experience to draw on and a broader perspective on life, and we face fewer social obligations or demands. We have time that we can commit to thought and contemplation, and we hold a greater sense of urgency, knowing that our time is limited and precious. So the same changes that might work to promote disconnection and isolation can also be seen or used as opportunities to attend to ourselves and our fulfillment. Our view of life changes. It's up to us to adjust. When we were younger, often with children and a job and a mortgage, etc., etc., our decisions tend to be made in a mindset of expedience, to goals, to finding success, creating a niche, obtaining security, and doing those things that look right. Our older selves are less constrained, and decisions and intentions should focus more on what feels right. It is a change we have earned and that we should come to value. Experience helps. The perspective of age played a major role in my career shift to ministry. Parker Palmer, in a tongue-in-cheek way, claimed that old is just another word for nothing left to lose. But later years are a fine time to take risks, and our lives might be enriched by lessons we were just not ready or willing to learn earlier. One of the best paths to wisdom is owning up to the myriad failures and shortcomings we have experienced. In everything I know and have read about advice for maintaining balance in our later years, it's pretty much the same advice that people give at all stages of our life. We are most likely to thrive if we focus, if we develop a sense of presence for what is going on within us and around us. What we have to remember is that all of our old ways are no longer automatically valid. Presence can be directed inside, drawing on all your life's experience to find lessons that make sense to where you are now. Florida Scott Maxwell, a psychologist, wrote at the tender age of 85, "You only need to claim the events of your own life to make yourself yours. When you truly possess all you have been and done, you are fierce in reality." Becoming whole, honoring your wholeness is not easy, but accepting your totality, good and bad, and learning to love it is important. You are not just the good you have been. You are not just the bad you have done. You are the sum of them, and that is the person you need to embrace. Honesty, self-honesty, is liberating. This is what allows you to move forward without harboring false pride or petty guilt. And this kind of self-inquiry is most accessible to us in our later years. Presence can also be directed outside. Everything you could appreciate is still available in the world, be it nature, art, music, friends. The later years are a time to keep growing, to learn new things to appreciate. Parker Palmer, again, at age 80, considered the Rule of Saint Benedict, which was a book created, which was the book, 5th, 6th century, sometime like that, that created the Catholic monastic life and still today serves as a guide for Benedictine monks. Monastic life is contemplative and rigid, dedicated to worship. Yet one of Benedict's key precepts is keep death daily before one's eyes. Palmer says he was disturbed by this in his first reading, wondering why anyone would look away from what is here now alive and vital, to contemplate mortality. But our current monk explained, the finality of death is meant to challenge us to decision, the decision to be present for the here and now, and so begin our eternal life. For eternity, rightly understood, is not the perpetuation of time, on and on, but rather the overcoming of time by the now that does not pass away. Thus, looking death in the eye does not suggest looking away from life, but looking more deeply into it. Palmer goes on to say, nothing makes me more grateful for life, even in the hard times, than remembering that it's a pure gift that I didn't earn and that I won't have forever. Nothing motivates me more strongly to pay it forward than knowing that the time to share a gift is when I have it in hand. More familiar to us are the words of Mary Oliver. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Always, Mary Oliver. She gets the last word. So be it. Amen. Namaste. Ashe. We will now sing hymn number 128, For All